tell me, first of all, how this came about that you became involved in this particular book.
I had been an editor at Variety, the Hollywood Trade, for about 12 years, and I had been an editor at the Hollywood Reporter for 4 years before that. So I knew the space, I knew the subject matter. My specialty was independent film and film finance, as well as when I was at Variety, I did a lot of the 10 to watch lists, like the directors to watch, producers to watch, screenwriters to watch, stuff like that. So I was friendly with Mike Goodridge, who edited the series. He was the editor-in-chief at Screen International, which was kind of a trade paper based in the UK. It wasn't really a rival to Variety, but we covered a lot of the same things, and we all go to the same film festivals and markets, and so of course Mike became a good friend. He's a great guy, and so he just asked me to if I was interested in co-writing the book. He'd already found one writer in the UK to handle all of the non-US based producers, and then had just thought of me and asked me, and I said I'd be thrilled to do it.
And what is it about producing that you were hoping to explore with your subjects? Are there misconceptions about what a producer does? Did you set out to kind of demystify the process?
Yeah, I think in general, people don't necessarily know exactly what a producer does, and that made this book really fun to write because we were actually able to lay it out in multi-chapter form in first-person interviews with producers who all do things pretty differently. We have studio-based producers in this book, and we have dyed-in-the-wool indies. And what a producer does can vary so widely. So that was really the fun part about this book, is that most people know what a cinematographer does or even what a director does, but it's much harder to pinpoint exactly what a producer does, and we really explored that in this book. I mean, most good producers can do everything, from finding a piece of material to developing it with a writer to finding the financing to seeing it through production, crewing up, overseeing the entire physical production, and then also managing to make the film, become something that can be shown at a film festival or is immediately sellable to a studio or a distribution company, and then help it all the way through ushering it into theaters, getting a marketing plan set up that makes sense for the movie and that makes financial sense. And whether you get the studio to pay for it or if you have to come up with P&A financing to get your marketing and your theatrical rollout set up. I mean, all of that is super complex, and it's even more complex today with the digital world being what it is, and with VOD and all kinds of complex windows popping up. Sometimes you really have to have such an intricate knowledge of the marketplace to be able to do a film justice and get it out on the right platforms and at the right time, and to find a way to finance that whole part of a movie's life. It's not just the production financing; it's also the other side.
What really fascinates me about the role of the producer is the fact that they have to kind of toe both lines, because they have to be of a creative mind, and at the same time, as you've been discussing, they have to know the particulars of finance and marketing, and a lot of times those two halves of the brain are in direct opposition to one another, I would think. But for a producer, they're the first and the last cheerleader of any film, really.
It's very true, and you would be surprised how thankless the task is, yet you have to be the one that's in control of everything or already sees the end result before everyone has even started work. They're really, if the director is the captain of the ship, the producer is the one that makes sure that it's the right ship, that it's provisioned well, and that it managed to find its way through every single storm it might meet on the high seas. It's a producer's work is really never done, and that, I think, is also the interesting part of producing. It takes a certain kind of person who has, as Lorenzo de Bonaventura told me, has that stick-with-itness that is required. You really, really have to want to make movies and be extremely passionate about it, and and be the on-set psychologist, be the parent, if need be the person who disciplines. It's incredible. It's I highly respect what some of these producers are able to pull off in such difficult circumstances, and they're constant. That most of them said, what, it's still teamwork. It takes a village. It's very much. They're always crediting the people around them, but they're the ones that have to have the overall vision and the wherewithal to get it done.
When they work to assemble a creative team to realize the film, it's essential that the producer and director be on the same page. What happens when that does not occur? Did any of your interview subjects express any difficulties with directors and not having the same creative vision, and how they rectify that?
I think you spend so much time with a director developing a script or in pre-production. I think for the most part, these producers are at that stage in their lives where that's not an issue, and very few of them actually mentioned that it was an issue early on. I think a lot of these people, because they're also creative producers, will try to find directors that are on the same level as them creatively, and I don't think they would step into a project if that project wasn't something that the producer and the director saw in a similar fashion. But I think, of course, those kinds of issues can crop up, and that's not to say that these directors or these producers haven't had that issue come up, but it wasn't one of the specific things that that these producers talked about a lot. I think it was more for them. It was always about I think the biggest struggle for producers is convincing financiers and studios to make their movies. I think that's one of the biggest tasks of producers faced with, and and sometimes it can take years. And even if they're completely on the side of the filmmakers, look, Lorenzo de Bonaventura was a studio executive before he became a producer, sort of not attached to or in an executive position at a studio, and he talked about getting The Matrix made with the Wachowskis, and that it just took years and years. And he said that by the time he got involved, it was probably 11 drafts of the script, and that it took so much convincing, not only on the part of the other people in the studio, Warner Brothers, but agents around town. And so you look back at the Matrix franchise and you think, wow, of course that was going to be a huge hit. But I think, for him, a lot of the projects that he took on were so not obvious at the time, including Transformers, which he said at the time people were like, yeah, that was an interesting TV series, and it's it's like these hokey toys from the 80s. How are you going to pull that off? And now in retrospect, you look at the enormous franchise that he created, and very much in tandem, of course, with Michael Bay, who directed, I think, all three of the first three.
And now a fourth one. Yeah.
Yeah. So, it's very, I just think I think that relationship with the director is very important, just to get back to your question. But I think, I think that is one of the things that you need to get squared away right away. Like, if you are having creative differences, you need to figure it out. You either find another director or, leave the project yourself if it was really the director's project, and and push another ball up the hill, because it's hard enough to make the movie, but I think if you're at odds with your director, it's kind of a no-brainer. You just have to pull the plug in one way or another and figure out how to move forward.
Were all of them anxious to kind of come forward and discuss in detail? I mean, what excited them most about your book? What did they want to express most of all?
Oh, what came through, I mean, for all of them, is they are extremely passionate about making movies. They live and breathe it with every breath, and that's the thing that came through with all of them. And I think, like I said before, it's such a hard thing to do, and to do well, that if you don't want to make movies with every ounce of your body, then you're in the wrong profession. So that very much it was something that I felt from them all, and I think it's they were all very excited to talk about how they became producers, and a lot of them didn't start out wanting to be producers. Ted Hope thought he was going to be a director, and then realized that his skill set really lent itself more to being a producer. And Lauren Shuler Donner started as a camera operator in TV, and I don't think she was sure she wanted to produce at the outset at all. I think she was just trying to figure out where she could land in the entertainment world, and she had always been good at writing, and she had also been into photography, and so her strength was really working with writers to develop a script. And I think she really loved digging in on a script and working with a writer and figuring it out, and that's how her relationship started with John Hughes. And that was really her first movie was Mr. Mom, which was an original idea that John Hughes just pitched to her over the phone, and said, I have this weird idea. I've written several pages of it. It's sitting in a drawer. What do you think? And she thought it was hysterical, and it was based on his own experience of being left home alone with his two kids and not really knowing how to do the laundry and cook for them and deal with all the kids' stuff while his wife was away. So, I think a lot of the producers also talked a lot about collaborations with directors that they've done multiple films with, and that's obviously very satisfying for a producer to be able to make another film with a brilliant director that they had a good working relationship with. That's really, I think, probably one of the major goals as a producer, is to find a creative partner like that you can continue to make movies with. And a lot of these producers do have those partners, and it may, in the case of John Landau, it's really Jim Cameron, of course, and he runs Cameron's company. But you have other producers that worked with directors many, many times, like Ed Pressman worked with Oliver Stone on multiple projects, including Wall Street and his first film, The Hand, and or their first film together. And then
he did Badlands with Malick. Didn't he? Pressman's incredible.
He did. That's right. Yep.
Wow.
Yep.
Wow. But when we think about directors, we think of established directors. We think of them as having a definitive stamp. We know that Woody Allen's obsessed with certain themes that he returns to time and again. You know a Woody Allen film as soon as you see it. When you're talking to these established producers, do they are they concerned with assessing their own kind of personal stamp on their films?
That wasn't so much something that I sensed from them, even though there are several of these producers that you could sort of generalize what they're good at. You could generalize that. You look at someone like Tim Bevan, who has consistently, he and his producing partner, Eric Fellner, have been the sort of indie but commercial crossover machine out of the UK, and they've made everything from Four Weddings and a Funeral to The Big Lebowski, and now recently Les Miserables. So, I mean, they definitely have an artistic edge, but are not afraid to make just all-out commercial properties as well. But again, even within their entire list of credits, those films are all very different, obviously made with different directors, and so sometimes hard to put your own imprimatur on your body of work when you're working with so many different storytellers.
Mm-hmm.
But if you look at obviously Lorenzo di Bonaventura has a penchant for action movies and big spectacular ones at that. And if you look at a Ted Hope, who has pretty much kept himself to the American-made independent arena from really the very beginning, even though one of his first hits was a movie made by a Taiwanese director called Ang Lee. Ted has consistently made films that you could call very American and very indie. So, it's probably not as much as a director, but some producers do have something that you can say, oh, well, that's a Lorenzo di Bonaventura movie.
Right. I mean, you definitely somebody like, like the star producers, like a Bruckheimer. You know what a Bruckheimer movie promises.
Right.
Yeah. And final question for you. You alluded briefly to this earlier, but with kind of the changing face of distribution and all the different avenues now that are possible with VOD and online and that sort of thing, is it more or less difficult to get a project off the ground, or is it always the same level of struggle?
I think it's probably the same level of struggle, but as Ted Hope really points out in his chapter, you just, as a producer, you have to know even more stuff. You have to know about just even more distribution windows and figure out what is the right deal for the film and what is the right home for a film, and do you structure it, with a cable channel buying the cable rights along with a theatrical distributor that's maybe smaller than you would have had in mind initially, but because you've got the cable deal, you can put it together, and it kind of adds up to the minimum guarantee that you were hoping to get when you were going to sell your movie. I think it's just it makes it more complex, but I think getting a movie made is it's always going to be hard. It's even when the times were simpler, and actually it was maybe easier to get a movie made back in the day when VHS was in its heyday, and that's been long gone for a while. So I think a lot of people are hoping that these digital rights will at some point make up for the loss of video, and it's still not there yet, and that does make movies more difficult to get made and financed, and there are so many other factors like the foreign market and the fact that a lot of the foreign markets TV rights are worth so much less now because the foreign TV or the foreign broadcasters are much more interested in having local programs, local reality shows, and even locally made movies on their airspace versus American movies. So it continues to be difficult and complex, and I think the digital stuff has added yet another wrinkle to it all. But also people are hopeful that it will be a legitimate revenue stream at some time down the road.